So Trustee Vettis, if you have to take even a 1 second break, I'm in charge, right?
I think it goes back to the president.
Oh, come on.
I think we adjourn by rule WWF.
Okay.
Okay, and
That was a little too fast, President Hoffman.
we're broadcasting now, and the
it's
meeting is live.
Okay, thank you all. So let's call this meeting to order. I apologize to the public here for our late start. Some technological issues of getting the appropriate panelists on board, but for the record, we'll call the meeting to order. And if we can do a roll call, please.
Trustee Bona?
Here.
Trustee Hoffman?
Here.
Trustee Moreno?
Hi, Lupe, this is Mike Long. I am here. I'm not sure if you heard me earlier. I'm here.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you.
And Trustee Vela as well.
Oh, I'm here now. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Trustee Sponson.
I'm here.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's move forward. Trustees, I know we have listed a flag salute today, but would it be the preference of the board to, since we have a full board meeting where the flag salute does take place, would it be okay with the board if we hold off on this and allow that to just take place at the full board meeting?
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I'm fine with that.
Okay, thank you, trustees. So we'll hold off and then we'll allow ourselves to do that during the full board meeting. Next item on the agenda is public comments. I do want to read the disclosure for the public here, public comments, and provide some of the general rules here of the comment and of the board question process for the meeting here. So the First Amendment and the Brown Act guarantee a member of the public the right to criticize a public employee in the performance of his or her duties. However, speakers are encouraged to focus their comments on issues relevant to the conduct of the public's business rather than on private or unrelated matters. Board Secretary, is there anyone signed up to address the Board of Trustees on a regular agenda item here?
No speakers signed up.
Okay. Is there any requests now? And I believe we can use our either chat or in person. I'm not sure how we have it open, but is there an opportunity for other attendees to be able to provide public comment?
They do have the raise hand feature available if you'd like to take participants that are raising their hand, but as of right now, none are showing.
Okay, and then if we can inform those that are on by telephone what they need to do to raise their hand.
Yes, it's *9.
*9 by telephone, and others can use the participant section. So I do not see any. With that, we're going to move forward with the presentation in front of us. Board members, we have 4 informational items for us. The California State Budget Update, the tentative budget presentation, the 2021 budget challenges, and the enrollment update. We're scheduled for an hour. We're started a little bit late, but we were scheduled for an hour and 15 minutes here. So I'll do my best to stay on time, provide people opportunities to ask questions. I would ask for you to allow the presentation to happen first. Then each trustee will be given an opportunity to ask. I'll go by roll call down the road here for trustees to be able to ask questions. Hoping to do that. Just a reminder, these are items that were requested by the full board to be on a committee of a whole. So the hope is to be able to get a little bit more of substance. I do want to note that some of these items were taken up in part by a couple of our committees. So some of you may be much more familiar with the items than others, but this is the opportunity for the full board to do that. So if there's no questions there, I'd love to be able to get started and begin with the California State Budget Update. Seeing none here. We have 2 special guests that will provide a state budget update. We're joined by Larry Galicio, who's president and CEO for the California Community College League, or the Community College League of California, I should say, and Mr. Jonathan Lightman. Mr. Lightman was the former executive director of the Faculty Association of California Community College and is recently retained by the league to provide some additional leadership and advocacy for our state's community college. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us. And if we can begin our presentation here.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, everybody. And in addition to Jonathan Lightman, who comes to us via a contractual agreement with the league, I'm also pleased that we're joined by our government relations director, Andrew Martinez, for this presentation. So before I turn it over to Andrew and Jonathan, just a couple of things that I'd like to say. I mean, number one is I want to thank Chancellor Rodriguez, who has always been, a statewide presence. And, personally, he always inspires me. And I think of him as sort of the statewide ambassador for community colleges. I mean, he's such an inspirational figure, and he's always been very forthright and a powerful presence in the Capitol, in the state Capitol, at the federal level, and just everywhere he goes. And you're very fortunate at LACCD to have such a leader. I'll never forget when he talked about being the chief opportunity officer. My favorite title. Instead of CEO, it's the COO. So I want to thank him for his work and for inviting us and for supporting the league. I also want to thank Trustee Hoffman, who's the second vice president on the CCC board, and has been instrumental lobbying at the state level and federal level, in addition to a variety of other important activities. And I also want to thank and recognize President Otto Lee for his, quite frankly, thankless work on the Student-Centered Funding Formula Task Force as the Region 7 representative, or the Area 7 representative. It's a lot of hard work, and he's been extraordinarily helpful in that work as well. So we hope this is to some degree a dialogue and not just a sort of a monologue by three individuals. We'll try to give you the best information and happy to answer questions. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues, Andrew Martinez and Jonathan Lightman.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And I'm very grateful as well to the trustee board and to Chancellor Rodriguez for inviting us back. I'm also grateful to our President and CEO, Larry Galizio, for his presence, as well as to Andrew Martinez, who's been an extremely beneficial addition to the league team. And I know that you are in tremendously capable hands. Just to say, I was thinking that I should wear a white shirt and tie like Larry today. It's over 100 degrees in Sacramento. There's a tradition here that there's no state budget until the mercury surpasses 3 digits. So you'll excuse me for being a little bit more casual, but it's just, it's exceptionally hot. So those of you who were present when we last presented might be familiar with some of these slides. Some of them are repeats, but they do provide some extremely important context. I know that there are some others who weren't here at that point, and so I'd like to just kind of review them and as well invite my colleague Andrew Martinez to participate as well. So if we could forward to the next slide, please. Thank you. Well, this gives a sense of what our state's long-term revenue forecast. And I don't have anything more updated for you than this, but as you can certainly see, that there is a dramatic dip from 2019-20 to 2021. And of course, the rest of it is projection. So much of it depends on where we are a state and as a country and as well as the globe in terms of our progress with the pandemic. Andy, do you have any thoughts you want to add on this one?
No, other than this, obviously this is a prediction because we won't know until July 15th where we're going to be.
I have a quick. Trustee Bettis.
Bonnet, possible to hold it to the end, or if it's really quick, happy to accommodate here.
Yeah, no, I was trying to figure out where do I raise my the hand. Just you know, these figures from where I'm seeing, even though I have bad vision, I'm a little. Could you sometimes offer verbally the conclusion, and just because I know we're trying to move quickly, I don't want to spend some time, but it's hard to read. So you put a lot of effort. I just want to make sure that we're understanding what we're seeing.
Yes, thank you very much, Trustee Blana. The state collects its revenue predominantly from three sources: personal income tax, sales and use tax, and corporate taxes. There are other taxes, but these are the predominant sources. What the chart demonstrates is where there is the biggest drop between the current year and the next year, which we call the budget year, is in the personal income tax. And this is a result of a diminished earnings due to the pandemic. And I mean, tragically, what we see is that, of course, as Andy mentioned, that while this is an estimate, we don't know the actual numbers, that in reality, we can project roughly 20% decline with 2.5 months experience of social quarantine. And again, we don't know how long this is going to be, so we don't know what the real numbers are going to show. But what we do see in this is that our personal income tax takes an incredible nosedive. Corporate taxes, not so much, and the sales and use tax, again, just a little bit, but where there is the most dramatic decline is in the personal income tax. And as we're aware, there was a 3-month extension provided to the state in terms of its filing requirements. And so everything that the state is doing right now is on the basis of reasonable assumption and not hard numbers.
So just a very basic question: are you missing, or do you not have another external source, which is potential stimulus funding, which would be another line right there?
Well, so this chart is from money collected from within the state. You make a very good point in terms of what is the impact of the stimulus, and the state government does act as a pass-through for some of the stimulus money, but this does not. Right. This does not take into account the stimulus money. It is about, it's about the resources that we anticipate being collected by the state.
Okay, thank you.
And we will return to the issue of the stimulus as we get more into the conversation on what the direct impact on the community colleges.
Thank you.
Trustee Veras, I have a quick question on this slide.
Thank you.
Sure, Mr. Swank, I'd be happy to provide the space. I just do want to remind people that we're limited on time. So
yeah, it's really quick. Whose data is this, Mr. Lightman, and how can we trust that if the personal income tax, and I'm not a finance person, so I don't know if the personal income tax is going to take a 20% hit, individuals 20% unemployment, how does that not drive down sales and use tax substantially? I mean, people couldn't go out, people may not still be able to go out, and they don't have jobs.
Yeah, Andy, I'm gonna defer to you because I know that you included this was from either from finance or from LAO.
This was part of the Department of Finance's May revised document. It's on the revenue speculation, and this is from their data that they've been tracking.
So I think so, Trustee Svanken, your your point about the sales and use tax, I noticed that too, that one would think that the curve would be a little bit more parallel. There's a certain inelasticity of demand of items like food and basic staples, others, say restaurants, entertainment and such, travel. One would think that there would be a much steeper decline. Again, this is what Department of Finance has estimated.
Okay, let's move on to our
next slide. Okay, the LAO, the Legislative Analyst's Office, which is the entity that is established to provide an independent perspective on budget and policy matters to the legislature, has addressed two possible simulations, although they acknowledge that there are more that can actually occur. In other words, what they discuss in their reports is what's called a U shape and an L shape. The U shape follows the pattern of a traditional recession where we have a decline, we are in that period of decline for a certain period, and then we have a recovery. The L shape is where we have a decline and we remain in that decline. Now there, again, the LAO has acknowledged there are other possibilities. There's something called a V shape. They discuss something called a Nike swoosh, all sorts of other types of economic models. But what they believe is that where we are now, it's somewhere between a U shape and an L shape. And they present different numbers for each one. And we'll discuss in a moment how these numbers reconcile with the governor's numbers. But where the U shape, again, that's the traditional recession, is presents an $18 billion year-over-year hole, whereas the L shape would create a 31 billion. Incidentally, what they have discussed in hearings is that the L shape is more likely to occur in the event that we emerge from social isolation a little bit too quickly relative to the pandemic, and then have to return to quarantine and then essentially forfeit the sacrifice that we had made before. That, in other words, that would be far more disruptive to our economic recovery. Andy, do you have any comments on this one?
No.
Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Now, under both the administration and the LAO, there is an agreement that this is not a one-year problem, meaning that the budget aspect of the recession will be multi-year. And according to the LAO, whether they're in the U shape or the L shape, the budget deficits persist until the budget year 23-24. And the difference in terms of the total shortfall, 64 billion for the U shape, 126 for the L shape. Now, it doesn't, again, this does not account for federal backfill. This would be in terms of state revenue. So federal backfill would mitigate these numbers. We also believe that greater investment in the community colleges could help mitigate these numbers. So these numbers are moving targets. However, if we have to look at it as a snapshot, this is the range that we're looking at over a period of time relative to revenues collected from within the state of California. Andy, you have any, do you want to add?
No, I just think that it's interesting, the difference in the scope of the problem from what the governor and Department of Finance have posed and what the LAO has suggested, these two different scenarios. Now, there's a little bit of gamesmanship with the governor's numbers in that there's part of that is the January dollars that he had originally predicted that are being swept off the table.
Okay, next slide, please.
May I ask, what's the difference between the two numbers? The governors and the LAO? Do you have that?
So yes, so the governor has the governor's number is 54.3, and the way he develops this number is he includes what would have been additional spending in the January budget, and he backs out there. So if you are just looking year over year, it's closer to the LAO's U shape. So in other words, the numbers are not all that different. It's all a matter of whether you begin with the money that we would have been spending and then back that out, or you simply look at what we are spending now and then look at what's potentially available for the following year.
Jonathan, a quick minute. Trustees, I want to see if we can get through as much of this presentation as we can since the limit of time. Please, if you can, write down your questions. I want to provide the opportunity for everybody to ask them. Jonathan, there's a few slides here. If we can begin moving through them, and really important questions,
Sure.
Trustee Tonkin. But
Okay.
I want to be cognizant of those who want to jump on for the 10-year recognition at 2 o'clock. So.
Thank you. We'll go through these quickly. Essentially, this goes back to the LAO. This is how they view the two numbers in terms of how they arrive at either the 18 or the $31 billion budget hole. And then so they factor it in. If you look at on each chart, you look at reduced revenues, and then you add in higher COVID spending, and then where you begin to back out is savings. And that's ultimately is where the shortfall is. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so here is where we have from the Department of Finance. This is the governor's projected spending on higher education, and you could see how our system takes a much steeper decline than either the CSU or the UC. Next slide. Okay. This helps answer the question why our system at this moment is more vulnerable. Because being within Proposition 98 presents both, there's both a benefit and a detriment. The benefit is that there is a section of the budget that is cordoned off for K-12 and community colleges. So in essence, there is a floor for K-14. Now, between the two segments, there's a statutory split, which could be waived. It's not proposed to be waived, but it could be waived. But constitutionally, there is a section of the budget that is reserved for us. However, the way Proposition 98 is calculated, it's in one of three tests. We are in what's called a test 1 year. And because we are in a test 1 year, that means that the amount of money that is available for Proposition 98 is it's proportionately sensitive to increases and decreases in overall state revenue. So if state revenues go up, Proposition 98 goes up. If state revenues go down, Proposition 98 goes down. And that is exclusive of federal backfill. And this helps explain the prior slide, why our decline is actually steeper than for the other two systems, which are not in Proposition 98, because frankly, those systems, it's simply a matter, it's a policy decision of the legislature how much money they want to give them. Where ours, there is a constitutional minimum that changes depending on how much money is available in the overall budget. Next slide. Okay. And this shows, pursuant to the governor's proposal, the May revise, this is where we get this in response to Trustee Svenson's question. You could see the total on the left side is $54.3 billion. That's what the governor calculates. And if you look at the right side and to see how does he propose plugging that hole, the biggest orange bar is in Proposition 98. It's the adjustment for K-12 and community colleges. And again, it's a direct result of the decline in overall state revenues. Next slide. Okay, so now we get into kind of the heart of the proposals, because the governor has developed a proposal and the state Senate has developed a proposal. What the governor says essentially is, unless we get federal funding, and his date is actually by July 1st, although he says that we can go back and review it if we get it later, then you won't get a big portion of your budget. What the Senate does is the Senate assumes we get the federal money. It's their date is September 1st, but the trigger, which I'll explain in a second, is October 1st. And they say if we don't get the federal money by September 1st or at the latest October 1st, then our cuts get switched to deferrals. So the Senate factors in the federal money. The governor says you'll get your, otherwise you'll get to be whole if you get the federal money. Next slide, please. And here is where you can actually see it quantitatively listed. It's this second line, deferred payment in Proposition 98, whereas the governor has deferral in all of Proposition 98 at 3.7 billion. The Senate has it at 9.9 billion, which is a difference of 5.3 billion. And that is the major difference between what the governor is proposing and what the Senate is proposing. And I'm sorry, I'd like to invite Andy Martinez if you'd like to comment on any of these.
I'll let you keep going.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so what the governor has proposed is a deferral of $330 million from the current year to the budget year, and then from the budget year 2020 to 2021 to 2020-22, that should be, I'm sorry, 2021-22, is 662.1. So the two together under the governor's proposal is roughly $1 billion in deferrals. And this is just exclusively for community colleges. What the Senate says is that if we don't get the federal money by September 1st, then on October 1st, we add an additional $674 million to what the governor has already proposed. So roughly $1.7 billion in deferrals, which is an extreme amount of money, although relative to cut, it's preferable relative to cuts, but in order to pay this back, I couldn't even imagine a scenario where we could pay it back within one period of economic expansion. It would take literally 17 years at $100 million a year to pay that back, give or take. And again, this is now based on projections of roughly 3 months of being in quarantine. Next slide, please. Okay, so what this slide shows is what the governor has proposed to reduce and what the Senate is returning to us. It's restoring with the deferral. Now, I do want to add that overall, the Senate's numbers, they don't necessarily match the governor's numbers in the sense that the Senate does spend more on Proposition 98 overall, and it's a roughly $210 million on community colleges overall than the governor's. But what the governor does is, again, unless we get the federal stimulus in, then he removes the COLA, he removes money for growth, and then the biggest cut is to the apportionment, $593 million. Reduction to apprenticeship, the strong workforce, which we'll talk about in a second, and that has garnered a lot of attention. The Student Equity and Achievement Program, he cuts that and also shifts money into that. So it's somewhat of a double cut. Part-time office hours and state academic senate, the DREAM resource liaison. So he takes that as a cut, and he expects that to be baked into the reduced Student Equity and Achievement Program. And then Calbright, he proposes reducing at $3 million. This is really, in addition to the approach of the Senate on the deferral, this is the one policy area where the Senate takes a much different line, where they adopt the $3 million reduction, which is ongoing funds, but they also take $77 million in one-time funds, and they use that to help backfill some of the cuts. So the Senate specifically says is that if we get federal money, none of that money will be used to backfill Calbright College. Next slide. Both the Assembly and the Senate continue the Prop 51 facilities projects, which the League had advocated very strongly that those being special funds and functioning as part of an economic stimulus be maintained in the budget. And there was some concern because of an original Department of Finance memo that suggested that special funds might be swept away in the budget shortfall, but these are expected to continue. Next slide, please. There is also a deferral in the scheduled increases in both the district side PERS systems, and to the community college system, this will be a deferral of about $120 million. There is no discussion as of yet of changing the arc of when these pension systems will have to fill their actuarial shortfalls. For instance, for CalSTRS, it was 2046. But we suspect that those discussions will occur next year, because if we're deferring the district side increase, then essentially what it does is for those systems, it prolongs the time of their actuarial shortfall. And so there may have to be some adjustments there. Next slide. Okay, so we have discussed the administration's proposal, and we have discussed the Senate. So the next question is, well, where is the Assembly in this? Next slide. So the Assembly essentially is expected to be aligning with the Senate. There are going to be some minor adjustments, and I'm going to defer to Andrew for his thoughts on this.
it sounds to us as if the Assembly had not planned originally to release a public document, but to align themselves more with the Senate and to be part of the conversation going forward. Because of the shortness of the window, June 15th, there's a lot to do mechanically behind the scenes to get the budget ready within 5 to 6 days, and then recognize there's a 3-day in public posting requirement. So that shortens the window of negotiation significantly. It sounds like last week the Assembly decided there just wasn't time to actually adopt a formal plan and was more willing to align themselves with the Senate. But I think they have realized that that maybe is strategically not the best approach. And there is a rumor that there'll be something released, some sort of document released tomorrow, more closely aligning. There were some indications of slight differences when it comes to funding for community colleges. There was a desire to possibly shift things from categoricals over to the main pot. But other than that, we don't have a lot of insight to what they're thinking about for community colleges.
Next slide. These have been our themes that we have been employing since we went into crisis mode for our entire system, which is what we need is stability, predictability, and flexibility. And we encourage you, when you speak with lawmakers, to incorporate these themes into your conversations. Next slide. Responding to the governor, and we have had many meetings. In fact, we went through a 2-day period where we partnered with both FAC, the Faculty Association, and the Student Senate, where we emphasized that in the governor's proposal, the cut to the base apportionment is too deep. Also, and this has been more of a league message, it's not adopted by everyone in the system, but from the league, that it is unrealistic for the administration to propose such a deep cut to the base and expect the same level of access. And that is contained in a trailer bill, which attempts to differentiate from the response of the Great Recession, where our system experienced what was called a workload reduction, so that we actually took in fewer students, but we were able to maintain a certain level of funding per student. Whereas the governor's proposal says your funding per student is going to go down, but we expect you to maintain the same number of students. Another theme that has been common to many organizations in the community colleges is that the cut to the Strong Workforce program will impede high-cost programs for in-demand jobs. The overall budget is predicated on federal action, which is out of our control, and that's really in the governor's proposal. The Senate says we're going to assume that you get the federal money, and then defer that if you don't. And then the last item, the cut to Proposition 98, is too deep. And I just want to share with you on this one, what the governor proposes is to take Proposition 98 and take it from the level where it was and to drop it to the minimum guarantee. That is an extreme decline in 1 year. Now, what he says in exchange is that, as I mentioned before, I showed you a slide, that we're in what's called a test one. The test one is, it's just simply a percentage of the budget goes to K-12 and community colleges. There's no fancy formulas. It's a very, very simple math. But what he says is that in exchange for me taking you down to the minimum guarantee, I'm going to add what's called a maintenance factor, which is, it's almost like a debt. And that occurs when we're in what's called a test 3 year, which is based on an entirely different calculation. And so as we recover, I will repay this debt to you to help you recover from being at the minimum level. The problem that we have with this is that we're we're under the common understanding that this is a multi-year problem. And as a result, we're only in round one. Round one is the June budget, which takes effect July 1st. There is likely to be a round two this year after we actually count the state income taxes, and that could occur in August or September. Round three will be next year, and we don't know what that will look like, whether that will be just a round three or might there be a round three and a round four within the same budget year. We simply don't know. The point being is that if we are in a downward slope, we don't want it to be a cliff in round one, because this is where our system will be destabilized. And going back to the LAO's numbers, which produced a whole number of questions at the beginning, as well as the Department of Finance's numbers, we have to go back to the idea that these are snapshots in time. These numbers are actually fluid, which means that we know what the power of the community colleges is in order to absorb dislocated workers, to train them, to retrain them, to help them retool for the new economy, to take students who might otherwise have chosen CSU or UC and to say that we have a space for you, to ensure that we are serving our communities, that everyone who can benefit from our education, that there is a place for them, and that it's not done at a truncated funding level, but one where we can truly honor their educational experience and provide them with the necessary education and training so that they can achieve whatever their goals are. To the extent that we are in a budget decline, we understand that we will take our share of reductions, but to the extent that is a multi-year problem, we do not want to be pushed off a cliff, because our ability to serve as an engine of economic recovery will be compromised. And instead of helping the state recover, if our doors are closed, or if we have to cancel high-cost classes for in-demand jobs, then we do not at all utilize the strength and the power and the depth of our institutions. And this is the message that we have been delivering over and over again. Next slide, please. Okay, so we did have a question earlier about federal, and there is, House has approved what is called the HEROES Act, which is actually round 4 of the federal stimulus. It's House Resolution 6800, if you'd like to look it up. And so what this provides is $90 billion to the states for education. Higher ed gets slightly under 30 billion, 26.72. And it's a different formula than the CARES Act, which was the third round. 75% of the HEROES would be based on Pell, but 25% on headcount. This is extremely important to us because so many of our students were excluded by the CARES Act in terms of both what Congress intended and how the Department of Finance, the Department of Education has somewhat overreached in terms of their guidelines and instructions. And it does broaden the allowable expenses from the CARES Act. There are some concerns, there's some language concerns in the HEROES Act, particularly pertaining to maintenance of effort requirement. The US Senate is aware of that, as well as our federal partners in Washington. In addition to this 26.72 billion, which comes from that $90 billion pot, there's an additional 10 billion to colleges and students for expenses associated with COVID-19. The Senate has indicated that the CARES Act, as approved, is dead on arrival, but They are having conversations in terms of what the next round will look like. And they are looking at elements of the HEROES Act to see what they can include in the Senate version. We cannot give you a timeline on this because in Washington, it really all depends on the leadership. What we have done is we have put out the call to those who have connections with Republican members of Congress in California, or of course, Republican members of the US Senate across the country, to impress upon them to talk to their leadership in the US Senate, Majority Leader McConnell, the primary target, about the importance of this, not just for California, but for higher education across America. Next slide, please.
Jonathan, let's stop there. I appreciate this. I wanted to give a quick moment for my colleagues to ask a question. I do want to remind them that we have a couple other moments on the agenda to get deeper into the LACCD budget, our specific challenges that sort of stem from obviously the built forward budget of this information. But I wanted to take a moment to go around, and if there's a brief comment or a brief question, with the knowledge that we have another section in our agenda here to get a little bit more in depth here. So let me ask Trustee Buelna, any questions or comments here?
No, thank you.
Okay, next, and I'm just going through the participant list here. So Trustee Hoffman. Trustee Hoffman.
I'm so sorry. I thought I unmuted myself. Thank you so much for the presentation. I don't have any questions at this time, but really appreciate the thorough presentation and appreciate you being here again.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Trustee Vela.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Really appreciate it. I think one of the my questions is, so is the state or is the LAO office at all taking into consideration the possible, delayed payment to mortgages and rents throughout California? We know that we've had policies to halt evictions, but in reality, these people, once the executive orders are lifted throughout the state, they're still going to have to pay up with their landlords and with their banks. And so, I didn't see that the LAO is going to, consider this windfall. I really doubt that every single person is going to get away with not paying 4 months worth of rent or their mortgage. And so that's one issue. And then second of all, same thing with taxes. I mean, I understand that July 15th is we've extended our taxes are due until July 15th here in the state of California. But at the end of the day, I don't see our franchise tax board forgiving taxes. I know that there might be less in taxes because of the fact that, people's income has been reduced, but also a lot of businesses did qualify for stimulus money for the Paycheck Protection Loan Program. And another big piece of it has been the disaster loans that are not the Paycheck Protection Program, but many firms in California, I was just seeing the numbers at the SBA, have received disaster loans, including the $10,000 automatic grants and other ones. So, I understand that, we have to be conservative, but these things don't seem to be taken into consideration in any of these budgets. So any comments to that?
Yeah, so the Senate, in their documents, actually, they have a whole section on the issue of the rent payments. And so they actually factored into their calculation. And we suspect that this is going to be part of the negotiation between the legislature and the administration. But that's a very astute question. Well, both of them were. The second point that you raised is the following. We are in an economic storm. There is no question. this is all on the basis of projection. There is likely to be a second round when we have harder numbers. And to the extent that businesses have folded and individuals have reduced tax burdens or simply cannot meet their tax obligations, which result in lower revenues to the state, those numbers will be calculated after July, and we will have a much more, a deeper understanding of what that will be, which could lead to a second round of reduction in for the budget year, but we just simply don't know at this point. As a result, because actually where the Senate is and where the governor is actually not far apart in terms of how they frame the problem, that this is essentially the roadmap moving forward. They just have different ways of getting there.
And really quick, and thank you, by the way, that makes me feel up. And I just also want to mention that, you know, Los Angeles County is the #1 county when it comes to sending money to Sacramento in revenue. And, you know, we're doing our best down here in order for the economy to not be as troubling. I can't say that for the rest of the counties throughout the state. But since we are the county community college district for LA, I know that we're really trying hard not to, you know, decrease the number of students in order for there to be, you know, business as usual, and to be quite honest with you, so that they're trained in case the economy is going to need a workforce component. So, but thank you. I appreciate that, Jonathan, by the way.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Hey, Steve, if I can, or Trustee Veras, if I can, sorry about that, if I could interject. So I really appreciate your points, and the questions are, like Jonathan said, very astute, and we're both native Angelinos, so we appreciate that, what you were saying. But you know, your jobs as leaders are difficult enough in a so-called typical year where we don't have a global pandemic, where we don't have the kind of civil unrest that we're seeing, where we don't have you know, massive unemployment and everything that we're seeing. And so #1 is none of us know the exact degree of confidence of the Department of Finance's projections. I mean, we can't say the interval, the confidence interval is 95%. I think they're struggling as much as all of us are. They're doing the best they can, but we're, you know, it's an overused term, but it's we're kind of unprecedented times. And they're going to pass a budget in June that's constitutionally mandated, essentially with projections. So we'll wait and see what that does. We're lobbying as hard as we can so that there's not a cliff, there's more of a slope. But then they're going to come back in August and do a revision because they'll have some numbers. And your points are very well taken in terms of how well they projected those numbers. And then, according to our Washington, D.C. colleagues, perhaps a stimulus package will come out of Washington, D.C. in July sometime. Of course, none of us know that, and certainly we don't know the amount. So we're dealing with so many unknowns. And then on top of that, how do you run a district with 9 colleges considering the unknowns with COVID-19? So we're trying to give you the best information that we have, but there's no doubt the uncertainty outweighs the certainty. And we would just say, to the extent you can lobby your fellow elected officials and anyone that you think is a decision maker, that in the first round, in the first year, we can't have extensive cutting of the bone because it'll harm our capacity. And this is a multi-year problem. That's going to be really important.
Okay, thank you. I got a couple more. We'll go to Trustee Fung. I know you were off and on, but I wanted to give you the opportunity. I see Trustee Schwanken with a hand, and the Chancellor certainly to make the comment here, and then we'll talk about our time and schedule here, because I know we're, you know, it's good materials, important materials, and probably didn't have enough time to make sure we covered everything we wanted to here. But Trustee Fung.
Thank you so much, Chair Veras, for the opportunity. And good afternoon, colleagues. Great to see everybody here today.
My question has to do with the strong workforce. I know Jonathan and Larry touched upon it as well. We're really looking forward and how we go forward as a district with high demand jobs in the Los Angeles County region. And as we get stimulus dollars that might come out of the federal government to position ourselves in the best opportunity possible. So my question would be, as we look at strong workforce, how can we look at some of the allocation formulas to really look at more urban areas? I know last year with the reallocation to rural areas and the unemployment rates in Los Angeles, we're going to be very much devastated by the upcoming recession that we're in now. As we come out of it, our community colleges want to be ready at the forefront. So any thoughts on that and how we can position ourselves on strong workforce? Thank you, Mr. Bear.
Thank you, Trustee Fong, for that outstanding question. So there's two dimensions to this, which is how does this money get allocated within the state, and then how does it get allocated within the regions? Where the conversation has been, but it's not reflected in either the administration's proposal or in the Senate's proposal, is to look at the ratio between what is going to districts and what is going to the regions. So to the extent right now that we're on a 60-40 ratio, 60 to the districts and 40 to the regions, to perhaps adjust that and to do what the league has suggested, which is to do what's called first dollar cut from the regions. We understand that the regions have an importance, so we're not minimizing that. However, your point is the point that we have been explaining, and that is that these high demand jobs are so key to the economic recovery that to fund the regions and to lose these classes because we don't have the money at the districts is illogical. And so what we're asking first and foremost is to examine why this program in the administration's proposal was targeted at 58% cut when other categoricals were targeted at 15% cut. That, I mean, this in particular makes no sense. But second, to be somewhat strategic about it and to recognize exactly what you said, that for Los Angeles Community College District and for but the city and the county of Los Angeles, to fill those positions that are in demand, that we need some support, because otherwise what happens then is that the districts will have to go back and rely, or the colleges have to rely on grant funding, which is extremely time intensive, and it's uncertain whether those monies will be there. We have to look at it from one other dimension. I'm sorry to take so much time on this, but I'm so passionate about this. We are in the middle of a pandemic. If we were to think about Los Angeles County not having sufficient numbers of respiratory therapists and then having a spike, what that would mean, this is really not about the colleges. This is about the people in Los Angeles, and at a time where we need to focus on community needs and economic and social and racial justice, that in fact, this is one of the roles that the community colleges play. And so it is completely inappropriate to be targeting this money at a time when it may most be needed.
Okay, great, thank you. Trustee Tonkin.
Thank you. I got kicked off. I don't know what happened. I want to thank Mr. Lightman. I think that is a really powerful message about the fact that we are the gateway and the opportunity for a diverse community, the most diverse, probably in the state or the country. And so cutting us now would be really a terrible injustice. So I want to just sort of put on the record for a future discussion, because we're not going to get done with this. We haven't seen from our staff exactly what they think the dollars are that we're going to lose. So I just want to get on the record some things that I think we should begin discussing. We haven't had in the 8 years ago, a couple of the trustees will remember that the chancellor put in place a hiring freeze. We haven't seen a formal hiring freeze. The chancellor 8 years ago put in a spending freeze.
Real quick, because trustee, hold on one second. We do have I'm going to do my best. I want to propose that we table the enrollment part of the conversation. I want to get as much budget as we can because we are adopting a tentative today, and the next proposal may actually, or the next agenda item will give you an opportunity to speak directly to that. I just wanted to make sure on the statewide consideration that we can focus our questions on the statewide conversations, and Ms. Gordon and the Chancellor and his team will get a chance to prepare, and you can get into the specific impacts to LACCD there if that's okay.
Yeah, and well, from the statewide folks, I want to know if they've seen districts put in hiring freezes, spending freezes. Also, we're one of the few districts in the state that had a 10% reserve. I want to know what other districts have done like that, and from our staff, how that'll impact us. And then as it relates to sort of this budget, and I'll bring it up in the regular meeting, there's an equity issue of us investing in African-American recruitment, retention programs. And I want to know if there's anything in the state budget that will allow us not to have to spend a reserve. If we have to, that's okay. But is the state going to protect programs that affect African-American and Latino men and are kind of the hardest to reach people and the ones that have been most overlooked and disenfranchised? Does the budget take into consideration funding for that?
I'm going to answer the second part of your question, and I'm going to defer to Larry to answer the first part. So neither the Senate version nor the administration's version touches Emoja or EOPS or Puente or any of the student services programs that are designed to serve specific communities of color, and I think that this is something that also DSPS is not touched, students with disabilities. Now, the Senate version backfills the money in the Student Equity and Achievement Program. The governor reduces that and then shifts additional expenses into this. So essentially, that money is more flexible on the part of the district in terms of achieving the district's aims at equity and diversity. So if the governor were to have his way, this is going to be more difficult. In terms of those statewide programs, many of whom are a little bit older, like EOPS, those are not touched. But we have to also be cognizant that this is round one. And then I'm gonna defer to Larry for the first part of the question.
Yeah, as Chancellor Rodriguez knows, there are 72 different responses to this, but what we've been hearing, we have some districts that have really minimal reserves and are looking at early retirement packages. They're not filling open positions. Some are looking at, quite frankly, cuts and personnel cuts already. Others are trying to hold the line on cuts, but looking at tapping into their reserves or cutting some courses to hire fewer adjuncts because those are the situation. It's really all over the map depending upon where people are. We have some districts that have over 20% reserves and others that are basic aid or community supported districts that are probably in a better position. So not trying to evade the question, it's just there are 72 different approaches depending upon where people, where districts are in their finances.
Can I follow up with you on that? How many districts do multi-year budgeting? Because we tend to really, we do it in an exercise, but with the pandemic and the declining enrollment and all those things, and the fact that we're going to see multi-year cuts, are there districts that actually do multi-year budgeting?
I think I don't have empirical proof. We don't collect that data, but just from the discussions that we have at the CEO board and with CBOs, I think the overwhelming majority do multi-year projections, as you mentioned. How many actually do multi-year budgets? I don't know the answer to that question. I'm sorry. I really don't.
Thank you, Trustee Veras.
Sure. I want to take a chair's prerogative and ask a couple, and then what I'd like to say is, Chancellor, in our agenda, since we have our budget approval today, hearing today, if we can take Ms. Gordon's presentation and then end it there. But I do want to provide a little time for us to go through the different challenges, so that way that my colleagues here can get a sense as to when we enter that conversation, that projected budget is built on the materials that Larry and his team have presented to us, and also with the challenges in mind, and then that helps us frame that as we table the other item. But I would say my comment one is certainly the Senate approach to this seems to be a better one for our district and certainly statewide. So I think certainly advocating for an adoption of a Senate proposal seems to be a much more reasonable approach. And secondly, and this is more of a question in terms of if we're going down the route of not deferral, but waiting for stimulus to backfill, have we got a sense of what prioritization, like what gets backfilled first, as opposed to, I know most of it's been categorized out as dollar amounts, but has it been discussed in any shape of prioritization? For example, where does COLA rate as opposed to strong workforce? Have we had any kind of dialogue about what comes? And if it's, if we take the Prop 98 as the most important piece of it, is it a reduction on the cut of Prop 98? What do we have any guiding principles, or could we recommend any guiding principles of how we come back to the table of all these really important line items here?
Okay, again, another outstanding question. Thank you very much, Trustee Veras. So what you're asking is a question of policy making that frankly is frustrating advocates, not just in education, but throughout the state capital world, insofar as the governor's trigger is an all or nothing approach, meaning all the federal money, it's not just for community colleges, everything, every part of the budget comes in, or the trigger cuts happen. The Senate has not actually released clarification on this. We have been making inquiries. And in fact, Andy and I we were on the phone yesterday, and the best we got was, we don't know. So this is where we anticipate that there is going to be a lot of detail that is going to be discussed behind closed doors now, and may be subject to a certain level of revision in August. Now, if you were to ask the question a little bit differently, which is to say, what are Congress's priorities? This is what we know, that on a bipartisan basis, workforce education ranks extremely high. Because remember, when Congress is dealing with higher education, although in the HEROES Act, they do a cordon off a section for public colleges and universities versus the privates, but you have to think of it, everything from, let's say, like LACC to University of Florida to Princeton. And they have to think about it all in one scope. And to try to put that into a bill at the federal level is extremely difficult. What we have been prioritizing is the cuts to the base and the workforce education. Now, this is since the release of the May revise, and we believe that those are appropriate themes. And we welcome the input of the LACCD and the other districts in terms of refining that message and what these cuts mean for you. But to the extent that we are looking for more strategic depth in these proposals, we don't have them.
Okay. All right, thank you. Chancellor, if we can have your comment, potentially wrap this section of it up, and then, like I said, we're gonna defer the budget conversation to our budget hearing, and if we can take just a few minutes, because I think I want my colleagues to have an opportunity to consider the challenges that we're facing dealing with, and that was the part that you and Ms. Gordon
Yes.
and we're going to cover. So if you can lead into just a few minutes there, and then I think after your comments, if Mr. Galicio and his team want to sign off, I think that would be
Okay.
okay.
Okay, thank you all again, Larry, Jonathan, and Andrew, for your thoughtful presentation, excellent responses, and for the opportunity as afforded to our board to answer some specific questions. I wanted to ask one or statement, maybe perhaps a state policy, then I'll lead into the other piece. One is that in both the Assembly and the Senate budget projections, if you will, and strategies, we did not see that they have identified the California College Promise Program as part of the strategy to backfill the state shortfall. Clearly that we're very happy about that. That's contrary to the recommendation from the LAO's office. And we've not seen that to be identified. So, with your assistance, Chancellor's office and many community college districts around the state, both Assembly Bill 19 and Senate Bill 2 were passed for that. So I simply wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything over the weekend that was lined out. Okay, fantastic. That's very good.
If
Our
I can,
number, yes.
if I can quickly comment
Yes.
on the LAO, the LAO has not said to reduce that number. What the LAO has said is that the legislature should have a deeper conversation of its priorities and understand what options it has. So they haven't said specifically take that number and take it. And
Good.
so, and I know that that may sound like a little bit of nuance, but they're very clear on that.
Good. Happy to hear that. Just wanted to underscore that and have our trustees hear that. So thank you for that. A couple of responses and leading into the points that Trustee Vettis, Chair Vettis asked me to talk about. Our number is about 62 million. That's the hit to us annual. And that's what we're trying to make up. And we do have a whole set of strategies associated with making that number up, including moving and recommending from the LA and Orange County regional consortium of our strong workforce, moving the formula from 60-40 to 70-30 local regional. That will provide additional local efforts to do exactly the kinds of efforts that you pointed out earlier in your comments. So I wanted to point that out as well. Yeah, very soon, by June 15th, if not sooner, we'll have laid out, and the board will see a whole series of how we get to $60 or so million this year. That's about 10% of our unrestricted funds that we have to make up if indeed the cuts move forward as they are planned, including all the areas that you would expect and that you've talked about, Larry, in your sort of observations of what some colleges are doing. We will absolutely do all of those. Those are the maneuvers that we have. So those are the levers that we have. But we're prepared and we will provide the heavy lifting. We're working with our state advocates, our federal advocates around these messages that you have provided, and we've built on those so that we can speak as one system voice for not only to have the community colleges positioned for the state's economic recovery, but that they further understand that we're also part of the response to the COVID response by taking hundreds of thousands and millions of students off campus so that the limitation to community spread occurs. So that we are part of the solution and we'll be part of the current as well as the future economic recovery for the state. So we will send you our talking points and you'll find them to be very consistent with yours around economic recovery for California.
Okay, great.
May I ask the Chancellor a question?
Can we allow our colleagues here at the League to sign off?
Sure.
So gentlemen, thank you very much for your presentations and your input. Really appreciate the partnership here and certainly look forward to continuing work with you all. So thank you.
Trustee Veras, if I could just add one final comment, that the last slide, which we didn't get to, is a resource page on the League's website. If you go to any search engine and plug in Community College League of California budget analysis, you have all the documents in front of you on the state budget, all in one place, so you don't have to search. And we hope that that will help you in your
Sure.
efforts. And we thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much.
We're grateful for your leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, Trustee Hoffman, I don't know if she has logged off already to try to.
Yes, she's logged off.
Okay. I know the other part of the agenda is ceremonial, gentlemen. Do you all want to take, and I say gentlemen because there's remaining male trustees left, but do you want to take the opportunity to begin at least a portion of the conversation for the challenges? Or would it be your desire to go on the other part of the meeting for the celebration portion?
The latter, Mr. Vettis, because a few of us have to pop off and get on the Zoom meeting because we're going to get locked out if we don't get on.
Yeah, Chancellor, though, Trustee Veras, I'd just like the Chancellor to cover that stuff in the public session. And I'd like to know where the $62 million number comes from, if it's the worst case, the middle case, which one, when you cover it. And if it's worse, and then how do we deal with year 2 of the problem? You know, what's the plan for year 2?
Okay, I can answer that in 30 seconds if you'd like me to.
It's up to Trustee Veras.
Okay, Mr. Swankin and trustees, that number comes from our 10% reduction scenario. We're working on 5, 10, and 15% budget reduction percentages. Before the May revise, when the May revise occurred, it looked like 10% was the one that we landed on per the state's instructions, if you will, to reduce. So that's how we come to that number. The worst case scenario is 15%, and that's not what we're projecting at this point.
Okay, now, colleagues, I want to remind you that we do have a budget hearing today. So what we didn't get a chance to have presented will be presented there. I did want to give the opportunity to have more comment and exchange, but it can certainly take place there in the regular meeting. And the other part of budget challenges could also be discussed in that presentation, Chancellor. But I do want to let you know that I think it would be my plan, because it was the request of the body to have an enrollment update to see if we can potentially squeeze another committee of a whole meeting during our committee specifically dealing with enrollment. So budget was the priority just because of the tentative being passed, and that was the desire here. I would like to say that if there's any other requests to adjust the board, obviously you're welcome to send it over to me. You're welcome to announce it in our regular meeting. Happy to accommodate. And if there is nothing else and no objections, we'll adjourn this meeting.
Where do we go?
Now, open public session.
Actually, if I may intrude,
yes.
Dr. Wellman, trustees, you should have received